The modern state fostered a spirit of nationalism to provide the people inhabiting its boundaries with a viable national mobilization, which further strengthened the state and it helped the formation of nation states. How the mobilizations continued at that time, and how the things that strengthened the state at that time, how nationalism played a very important role in making nationalism, in enhancing nationalism in the Europe. What was the meaning of nationalism at that time? Meaning of nationalism. In March 1882, during a lecture of Sorbonne, the French Orientalist and historian Ernest Renan Ernest Renan argued that the nation was a spiritual community which wished to uphold its sense of unity through a day vote of confidence. In a tract entitled Marxism and National Question, Joseph Stalin argued that a nation is a historically constituted, stable community of people formed on the basis of common language, common territory, economic life, and psychological makeup manifested in a common culture. When the people of common culture they live together, and when the people of stable community they live together, they form on the basis of common language. They speak a common language so that they can understand each and everything towards themselves, and they people make the nationalism. They people make the on behalf of national question. Marxism has described about this, and Joseph Stalin argued these things on behalf of nationalism. Renan offered an idealist definition of the nation as against the materialists analysis of Stalin. It is interesting that both authors means Renan and the Stalin, they believed that there was nothing eternal or everlasting about nations. There is nothing eternal and everlasting about nations. The statement of Renan and Stalin was like this. Both believed that nations were historical constructs that had a beginning and would also have an end. When it start, and definitely they will get end. Although it is possible to trace the idea of a nation to the earliest times and certainly to the 16th century, as in the case of German word work for people, there is considerable unanimity among historians that nationalism is a modern concept. It is considered view of historians that nationalism in the modern sense emerged with the growth of industrial capitalism or print capitalism was then sustained by a variety of factors, by notions of community based on language, ethnicity, or religion, or by the rivalry and competition among states and imagined communities. This is very important thing for all of you. What is nationalism? Define nationalism. What were the causes of nationalism? What were the impacts of nationalism? These type of question will come into your exam, so listen carefully. The idea of nationalism and nation state. The modern concept of nation emerged during the age of revolution. American Revolution of 1776 and French Revolution of 1789. These both revolutions played a very important role in making nationalism in Europe. In America, political discourse did not emphasize the unitary aspect of nationalism. The Americans were concerned with the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, with a proper relation between the American Union and the states. and with development of liberal capitalist society. By contrast, in France, the nation was conceived as and indivisible. One and indivisible. The idea of nation was inextricably linked with mass participation, citizenship, collective sovereignty of the people of a given nationalism. Hobsbawm draws a distinction between the revolutionary democratic and nationalist conception of the nation, between revolutionary democratic and nationalism conception of nation. Who Hobsbawm? In the revolutionary democratic view of the nation, the sovereign citizen people within a state constituted a nation in relation to others, whereas in the nationalist view, the prior existence of some distinguishing features of a community, setting it apart from others, was necessary to constitute a nation. Now they came to know about the necessity of constitution in a nation. The French insistence on linguistic uniformity after the revolution was quite strong, but the revolution itself recorded how few people actually spoke it. Actually, how people spoke it. Stages in development of nationalism. The growth of nationalism can be broadly divided into two phases. The first phase occurs before late 18th century when certain parliamentary notions, when certain preliminary notions of national unity can be said to have existed. Its chronology varies from one country to another, but these ideas of geographical or cultural unity are only a precursor to modern nationalism. The later phase takes shape only in the wake of French Revolution, except perhaps in the cases of Britain and France, where the nation building exercise started in 16th century and 17th century respectively. Nationalism before 1789, that is also known as proto-nationalism, before 1789. Proto-nationalism. In historical literature, the emergence of modern state, the emergence of modern nation, and nationalism is in the late 18th century. What is that? Historical literature, the emergence of modern nation and nationalism in the late 18th century. Nationalism acquires a more democratic character in the period of mass politics in the late 19th century. Several 19th century observers believe that elements of nationalism, a sense of ethnic or linguistic or national identity, emerged in the medieval period. This may be called patriotism or proto-nationalism. Patriotism or proto-nationalism. The 19th century French historian and political Gazette believed that Guizot believed that the Hundred Years' War between England and France between 1397 to 1453, the Hundred Years' War, provoked by the claim of the King of England to the throne of France. They brought together the nobility, the burghers, and the peasantry in a common desire to defeat the foreigner who had attacked and plundered France. Though modern historians regard this as a period of crisis marked by war, plague, and famine, it did create a sense of patriotism. In a later period, the growth of monarchy brought about the creation of a unified French state. Though some historians have emphasized that France was a geographical reality which, excuse me, though some historians have emphasized that France was a geographical reality which did not depend on the role of centralizing monarchy, and this geographical determinism is not very convincing. Modern nationalism and in the 19th century. Modern nationalism. The 19th century is regarded as a century of nationalism, a period in which the idea of a nation and nation state based on Britain and France was generalized and perceived as the universal principle for modern societies. In practice, the principle of nationality applied only to nationalities of a certain size in the liberal period of nationalism because of this faith in the benefits of large scale states. It is this tacit liberal assumption of a certain size of states which Hobsbawm calls the threshold principle of nationality, which the liberal bourgeois broadly endorsed from about 1830 to 1880. The big change in attitude towards nationality and nationalism came about in the late 19th century with the growth of mass political movements in the era of democratic politics. After 1880, the debate about the national question became important with the need with the need to mobilize voters for different political parties and to gain adherence for new ideologies, whether among socialist or minor linguistic and national groupings. In the later stage of mass politics and national movements, the state played an active role. Colonel Pilsudski, Colonel Pilsudski, the liberator of Poland, in fact observed what he observed. It is the state which makes the nation and not the nation of the state. It is the state which makes the nation and not the nation the state. Next is how nationalism and the modern state create the nation state. How modern state create the nation state in nationalism. Nationalism is an ideal begun in 19th century based on the ideas of French Revolution and the consequences of Napoleonic military victories and the political realignments which these victories produced. The victory of Napoleon, military victory of Napoleon, these type of things we are discussing about. The political realignment, okay, of Napoleon. The simplification of the political map of Europe by the reduction in the number of states. If we are talking about the map of Europe and the reduction of the number of the states within the German Empire, the quickening of the pulse of Spanish nationalism during the military campaigns of Peninsular War, and the rise of Italian and German nationalism based on the inspiration of the French armies, the Napoleonic role in nation state building, and contagion of revolutionary and democratic ideas helped to spread the gospel of nationalism in Europe. It appealed to the intelligentsia and the bourgeois, which spreadheaded, which spearheaded the movement for Italian and German unification, the unification of Italy and the unification of German. Mass politics in the late 19th century was to give an additional fillip to nationalism, especially in Eastern Europe, a region which was relatively backward compared to more industrialized parts of Western Europe. Absolutism and modern state. The absolutist states, particularly in Western Europe, played an important role in the gradual transition from feudalism to capitalism. Gradual transition from feudalism to capitalism. The dynastic rules of Europe in 16th and 17th centuries were responsible for the creation of centralized states with substantial standing armies. Next is the absolutist states claimed rights to taxation and a monopoly over the legitimate use of force within the boundaries of the state. Yes, to know about or to give some rights to the state, they need taxes. And that's why the rights to taxation was very important at that time. The emergence of strong centralized states was a product of wars. Yes, on behalf of the states, on behalf of the places, they fought wars, frequent wars. Among the absolutist rulers, the growth of state taxation was linked to the cost of waging such wars because they bear the war enhancement and within the help of wars and for the cost of war, they give taxes to the people. And the prime objective of the mercantilist policies of absolutist rulers was to enhance the economic power and thereby the military power of their states with other states. To make policies, to fight wars, to make arrangements, to make agreements, they fight wars. And for wars, they took taxes for waging such a war, for waging the cost of wars. Next is modern states and system of states. What was the situation of modern states and what was the system they were doing in the states? The industrialization of Britain during late 18th century and gradual expansion of industries in Europe over the course of 19th century was very uneven process. And countries in industrializing later had certain disadvantages in terms of competition with those who were ahead in industrial production. Very much competition. Alexander Gerschenkron argues in Economic Backwardness in Historical Perspective that countries like Germany and Russia, which began to industrialize after Britain, like Germany, like Russia, they wanted to make them an industrial, they wanted to make them industrialize. Okay, after Britain, the first industrial nation was Britain. The role of the state was more significant. That's why they wanted to make strong to their states first. To compensate for a late start, the state played an active role in creating appropriate conditions for industrialization by creating a system of tariff protection, even abetting the process of cartelization. Nations and nation states. Modern states, nations, nationalism are all territorial in the sense that their claims are based on specific geographical areas. Geographical areas played a very important role in making nation and nation states. In the 19th century, the idea spread that the state and nation should coincide geographically in the nation state. The modern state is often called the territorial state, since it has a clearly democratic territory in which it claims sovereign rights over all its citizens. Nationalism is a territorial ideology which is internally unifying and externally divisive. What was the relation between democratic and nationalist mobilizations? The relation between democratic and nationalist mobilization. Number one, liberal democracies and nationalism. Number two, factors affecting national mobilization and democratization. Number three, ethnic or linguistic basis of nationalism in late 19th century. And number four, nationalist movements and democracy. We are going to discuss these 4 points, what in that relation between democratic and nationalist mobilization. Liberal democracies and nationalism. How liberals played a very important role in democracy and nationalism. The French Revolution, with its ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity, and rights of man, served as a source of inspiration for all subsequent democratic and popular movements. They played a very important role. Who? Liberty, equality, fraternity, and the rights of man. The Jacobins Club inspired the radical ideology in 19th century throughout the Europe. Who? Radicals. The ideal type of bourgeois revolution was derived from experience of the French Revolution. The culottes, the sans culottes were a politically active group in urban area who were adversely affected by war and economic crisis. Factors affecting national mobilization and democratization. What were the factors? As the 19th century advanced, the idea of democracy, despite the reactionary role of concept of Europe and the Holy Alliance, grew in popularity. This was associated with the growth of liberalism in Britain and France. And it is customary to contrast the experience of the first wave of capitalist of Britain and France with that of Germany and Italy, which were a part of second wave. Before going into this issue, let us observe the general consequence of economic development, modernization, and democratization. Next is nationality and the language. The modernization of states were accompanied by the development of a centralized administration and a large bureaucracy based on rational legal principles. This process was accompanied by the development of a national language, of a language of administration, and not merely local communication. The language which was speaking by the common people is different, and which was using for the administration purpose, that is different. Here we are talking about this. The choice of a dialect or language as a medium of official communication led to people or state support for its propagation, especially through the school system. School played a very important role in this. Nationalism, state, and class. In older status, in older states like Britain, like France, a state-based patriotism itself encouraged a sense of nationalism during the course of 19th century. The process which turned subjects into citizens turned helped to encourage a sense of nationalism in several states. Popular perceptions of natural culture difference or distinctions, political and national characteristics contributed to both nationalism and national chauvinism. In the late 19th century, in countries, regardless of whether they were liberal capitalist states like Britain or second wave late industrializing states like Germany. Nationalism, empire, and imperial rivalry. Nationalism, empire, imperial rivalry. The gradual extension of franchise and efforts of liberal states like Britain, modernizing states like Germany, or survival strategies of autocracies like Tsarist Russia to gain legitimacy and popular support produce a form of patriotism. Next, national pride and national identification was also encouraged by overseas expansion, by the material and psychological rewards which imperial possessions brought to countries like Britain, France, Holland, and Spain. The policies of the state designed to achieve greater legitimacy and support for state policies, and the spontaneous and state sponsored support for imperial exploits and colonial profits encouraged a sense of national pride, ethnic or linguistic basis of nationalism in the late 19th century. By the late 19th century, processes of modernization and homogenization produced a sense of nationalism in the older states and those large states which had achieved unification by then. The idea of unitary nationalism often produced a counter nationalism among groups. Groups were ethnic or linguistic, which felt either oppressed or excluded by the process of nationalist homogenization. Next is nationalism in the period 1880 to 1914 was no longer constrained by the threshold principle which had limited the demands for nation state earlier. Next is nationalist movements and democracy. Nation, nationalism as an idea has been identified with people, popular sovereignty, and democratic rights. J.J. Rousseau's concept of general will, of the rights of men, of the right to elect governments on the basis of universal adult male franchise constituted some of the democratic ideas which animated politics in the 19th century. Although the French Revolution was an important influence on national movements in the 19th century, towards the late 19th century, there was an liberal or right wing shift in the nature of nationalist politics. Next is nationalism and social class, Germany and Britain. How nationalism started in Germany and Britain. The revolutions of 1848 revealed the weakness of liberal bourgeoisie in Europe. It compelled the liberals in Germany to accept support for nationalism from the most powerful state, Prussia, and similarly also led to the ascendancy of Piedmont, Sardinia on in Italy. In Europe, the revolutions of 1848 revealed the emergence of nationalist sentiment within the Habsburg Empire and the Eastern Europe. The emergence of working class and socialist ideology throughout the Europe, and the differences within the liberal democratic movement which separated the middle class from the workers, peasants, urban people. They separated. During the 1848 revolution in Europe, the struggles of poor and the middle class had distinct features and objectives which were apparent. Next is Italian nationalism and popular mobilizations. In Italy, the participation of masses and the participation of peasants was limited because of the conservation of the rulers of states. They were very conserved in nature. The reluctance of the landlords to grant concessions to the peasants to draw them into the national movement. Yes, the taxation was very much a burden for the peasants. That's why they came for national movement. The inability of their intelligentsia and revolutionaries to bridge the gap between town and country, and the fear of radical change which affected the elite which dominated Italy in 19th century. Next is phases of national identity. National Identity Development, NID, especially in Eastern Europe. Phases. First phase, cultural nationalism for phase A and B. Next is Shays nationalism. Next is Hungarian nationalism. These were the phases. First phase, cultural nationalism. On behalf of culture, they influenced themselves for the nationalism. The developments of a European romantic perception of natural and untamed peasantry with a serious study of folklore by the late 18th century provided a basis for many a national movement in Eastern Europe by the late 19th century. The cultural and linguistic movements in Europe between 1780s and 1840s were the handiwork of scholars and ruling elites anxious to preserve and develop national traditions of forgotten people or peasants, and were sometimes even the product of foreign scholars and elites. Shays nationalism. The emergence of a common Shays national feeling in attributable to the fear of competition for senior posts for immigrant German clerics felt by the native clergy. The influx of German colonists into Bohemia in 12th century, where they were successfully engaged in mining and handicraft production, led to emphasis on their own language by Shays in order to draw a distinction between themselves and German migrants. Next is Hungarian nationalism. Hungarian nationalism. In the case of Hungary national awakening among Hungarians took place at about the same time as among other ethnic groups in the late 18th century. E. Niederhauser distinguishes between two phases in national movement, cultural and political. During cultural nationalism phase, a national language is created by among numerous dialects and historical consciousness emerges. It in the political phase, demands for local autonomy, use of national language in administration, they eventually creates a nation state. Next is the spread of national idea and nationalism. National idea and nationalism. Czechoslovakia. Have you read about this or listened about this now? Czechoslovakia. The Shays politicians of late 19th century produced no grand political schemes and settled for small concessions. Economic and cultural advances in Shays lands by German capital mean that there was little support on economic grounds for Shays nationalism. It was World War One which triggered nationalism in the Shays lands, as elsewhere in Europe. Wartime difficulties produced unrest in towns, desertions in the battle from field from 1915 onwards, and eventually Shays writers in 1917 published a manifesto supporting a future democratic Europe of free nations. Next is Hungary. In Hungary, the creation of dual monarchy appeased the Hungarians but aroused national sentiment among other nationalities. According to the official census between 1850 and 1910, conducted by Habsburgs, the Hungarians constituted an absolute majority only from 1890 onwards. Next is Poland. In Poland, the nobility by the 18th century developed a sense of Polish identity based on the acceptance of Polish language and culture. The Polish nobility, constituting 8% of country's population, was large by European standards. The peasants and even burghers were not included in political nation and at the end of 18th century. The second half of 19th century saw the emergence of Belarusian and Ukrainian national consciousness based on language and literature, which resisted domination by Polish language and literature. Polish writers from Belarusian lands also wrote in Belarusian and helped in to create a national literary tradition. These differences of language were linked to social differences. Polish was linked to nobility and intelligentsia, while Belarusian and Ukrainian consciousness emerged from within a plebeian tradition opposed to the Polish state. We have discussed about national idea. We have discussed about national identity, the development of national identity. We have discussed about Italian nationalism, how the nationalism enhanced in Italy. We have discussed about Germany and Britain, how nationality enhanced, how nationality developed in Germany and in Britain. Because after industrialization, we have discussed a lot of things related to nationality, related to industries and all. After establishing a lot of industries, after establishing the population in that particular area, they need some political movements, they need some political wars and all. They need some agreements related to them. And we have discussed about nationalism, empire, and imperial rivalry. How the rulers they create the war situation for one another. Nationality and language. How language played a very important role in making nationality in a particular region, in a particular area, or in a particular country. What were the factors affecting national mobilization and democratization? Democratization means the need of the constitution and democracy enhanced in that particular area. Liberal democracies and nationalism. Liberal democracies, just we are going to recall all the things because this unit is very important for all of you and you need to learn all these topics and points very clearly. That is very important. Liberal democracies and nationalism. Next, what was the relation between democratic and nationalist mobilization? Relation between democratic and nationalist mobilization. These were the factors we will cover in this unit. Nation and nation state. How nation played a very important role in making nation states. Next, we have discussed about modern states and the system of states. How the states became modern and how the system, they were the government of that particular states, how they make the system to run the states. And the absolutism. What is absolutism? The absolutist states, particularly in a Western Europe, played a very important role in the gradual transition from feudalism to capitalism, because we have discussed about feudalism in our earlier units, and the end of feudalism they start capitalism, because industrialization played a very important role for the capitalism and they enhance the capitalism at that particular area, just because of money, just because of economy, to enhance economy in the particular area, they enhance capitalism on behalf of feudalism. The dynastic rules of Europe in 16th and 17th centuries, they were very responsible for the creation of centralized states. Because if you want to centralize any state, any country, then you need a particular ruler in the particular place for with substantial standing armies also. Absolutist states claimed rights to taxation. Now they need taxation also. They need a monopoly over the particular area just to just to help in making the boundaries of the particular state. The emergence of strong centralized states was the product of wars among the absolutist rulers. Means of that particular area, the rulers played a very important role in the wars also. And for the cost of war, they need the state taxation also for waging the cost of wars. The prime objective of mercantilist policies of absolute rulers was to enhance the economic power and thereby the military power of their states with other states. Absolutism and the modern state, how nationalism and the modern state create the nation state. Nationalism and modern state, they both create a nation state. Modern nationalism in 19th century we have discussed about, and that is also very important, so we recall all these things again and again. The in 19th century is regarded as a century of nationalism. How? This is the period in which the idea of nation and the idea of nation state, they based on Britain and France. They were generalized and perceived as a universal principle for modern societies. They generalized. In practice, the principle of nationality applied only to nationalities of a certain size in the liberal period of nationalism. Because of this faith in the benefits of large scale states, it is this tacit liberal assumption of a certain size of states. How Hobsbawm calls the threshold principle of nationality, which the liberal bourgeois broadly endorsed from about 1830 to 1880s. The big change in attitude towards nationality and the nationalism, they came about in the late 19th century within the growth of mass political movements. Means the political movements held in the particular area, the population that were immersed in the political movements, that's why it is called as mass political movements in the particular area, just to make democratic politics. They were doing very much revolutions and movements just to make the democratic politics. After 1880, the debate about the national question became very important, with the need to mobilize voters for different political parties. If they want to give vote to the different political party, they wanted to give vote to the different political party, then they make themselves independent for that. That's why they need to gain adherence for new ideologies, whether among socialists or minor linguistic and national groupings. Just for this, they were doing same. In the later stage of mass politics and national movements, the state played an active role. Colonel Pilsudski, the liberator of Poland. Yes, we are talking about Poland's liberator. In fact, he observed, it is the state which makes the nation and not the state of not the nation, the state. That is very different. What he observed, it is the state which makes the nation, not the nation the state. How nationalism and modern state create the nation state? Nationalism as an ideal began in the 19th century based on the ideas of French Revolution. French Revolution in 1789, Russian revolutions, and the consequences of Napoleonic military victories and the political realignments which these victories produced. These important things we have discussed. It appealed to intelligentsia and bourgeoisie, which spearheaded the movement for Italian and German unification. These two things were also very important, the unification of Italy and the unification of Germany. Yes, Mazzini, Gebur, Garibaldi, they three scholars and thinkers were played a very important role in the unification of Italy and the unification of Germany. We will discuss in our next class also. Mass politics in late 19th century was to give an additional fillip to nationalism, especially in Eastern Europe, a region which was relatively backward compared to the more industrialized parts of Western Europe. We have discussed about absolutism and the modern state also. We have discussed modern states and the system of the states. Alexander Jeshenkron argues in economic backwardness in historical perspective that countries like Germany, countries like Russia, they began to industrialize after Britain because industrialization came from Britain in other countries just like Germany and Russia also. And the role of the state was more significant. And to compensate for a late start, the state played an active role in creating appropriate conditions for industrialization by creating a system of tariff protection, even abetting the process of cartelization. Tariff protection means the people give tax to the ruler and the ruler give protection to the people. Nation and the nation states. Nations, nationalism, they are all territorial in the sense that their claims are based on specific geographical areas. The modern state is often called the territorial state since it has a clearly democratic territory in which it claims sovereign rights over all citizens. Means sovereign rights, all religions are equal in front of a citizen. Nationalism is a territorial ideology which is internally unifying the externally divisive relation between democratic and nationalist mobilization. What was the relation? Liberal democracies, factor affecting national mobilization, linguistic basis of nationalism, nationalist movement, and democracy. How they played a very important role in making nationalism. Liberal democracies and nationalism, and that we have discussed about the Jacobin clubs. The Jacobins inspired the radical ideology. Means, have you read about the liberals and the radicals? Liberals and the radicals. Liberals means they're very soft-hearted people, and radical means they were very warm-hearted people. Okay, and the Jacobins inspired the radical ideology in 19th century throughout the Europe, so that nationalism spread all over the country. The ideal type of bourgeois revolution was derived from experience of the French Revolution. The sans-culottes were politically active group in urban area who were adversely affected by war and economic crisis. Factors which were affecting national mobilization and democratization. How democratization held in the particular areas. In 19th century, advance the idea of democracy, despite the reactionary role of the Concert of Europe and Holy Alliance, they grew in popularity. This was associated with the growth of liberalism in Britain and France. Growth of liberalism also. They grow in Britain and France. It is customary to contrast the experience of first wave of capitalism of Britain and France with that of Germany and Italy, which were part of second wave. Britain and France, first wave, Germany and Italy, second wave. Before going into this issue, let us observe the general consequence of economic development, economic modernization, and democratization. These three words are very important: economic development, modernization, and democratization. Nationality and language. On behalf of a language, the people played a very important role, and the rulers also of that particular area. They give a common language and they give administrative language differently. Just like the modernization of states were accompanied by the development of a centralized administration and a large bureaucracy based on rational legal principles. The choice of dialect or language as the medium of official communication led to public or state support for its propagation, especially through the school system. Nationalism, state, and class. The processes which turned subjects into citizens helped to increase a sense of nationalism in several states. Nationalism in several states. Popular perceptions of natural cultural difference or distinctions, political and national characteristics contributed to both nationalism and national chauvinism. In the late 19th centuries, in centuries regardless of whatever they were liberal capitalist state like Britain or second wave industrializing state like Germany. Nationalism, empire, and imperial rivalry. On behalf of wars, they create an empire, they make an empire, and they make their empire very strong on behalf of the rivalry. And on behalf of this, they make their nationalism in their countries. National pride, national identification was also encouraged by overseas expansion, by the material and the psychological rewards which imperial processions brought to countries like Britain, France, Holland, and Spain. The policies of the state designed to achieve greater legitimacy for imperial exploits and colonial profits increased a sense of national pride. By the this is the linguistic basis of nationalism in the late 19th century. We have discussed. The idea of unitary nationalism often produced a counter nationalism among groups, like ethnic or linguistic, which felt either oppressed or excluded by a process of nationalist homogenization. Next, nationalist movements and the democracy. General will, J.J. Rousseau, concept of general will, of the rights of man, of the right to elect governments on basis of universal adult male franchise, not universal adult franchise, universal adult male franchise constituted some of the democratic ideas which animated politics in the 19th century. Nationalist and social class, Germany and Britain, that is also a first wave. And in the second wave, we can talk about Russia. The revolutions of 1848 revealed the weakness of liberal bourgeoisie in Europe. In Europe, the revolutions of 1848 revealed the emergence of national sentiment within the Habsburg Empire and Eastern Europe. During 1848 revolutions in Europe, the struggles of poor and the middle class had distinct features and objectives which were apparent. Italian nationalism and popular mobilization. Nationalism, how the people of Italy they participate in nationalism. Yes, in Italy, the participation of the masses and the peasants was limited because of the conservatism of the rulers of the state. The rulers of the state or rulers of the Italy, they were very conservative in nature. That's why the people, mass people, were not that much participated in the revolutions. Shares nationalism and the Hungarian nationalism. In these type of nationalism, how the people of that particular area they participate. People themselves they spread the ideas of nationalism in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, and in Poland. And we have discussed a lot related to these things. Just like in Hungary, the creation of dual monarchy appeased the Hungarians but aroused national sentiment among other nationalities. According to the official census between 1850 and 1910 onwards, in Poland, the nobility by the 18th century developed a sense of Polish identity based on the acceptance of Polish language and culture. The Polish nobility constituted 8% of country's population, was large by European standards. At the end of 18th century. The second half of the 19th century saw the emergence of Belarusian and Ukrainian national consciousness based on language and literature, which resisted domination by Polish language and literature. Polish writers from Belarusian lands also wrote in Belarusian and helped to create a national literary tradition. We have discussed a lot about and the national unity and how the country faced the problems in gaining nationalism. Thank you. Have a nice day.